In the quiet of night, when the world slows down and the darkness gently settles across the walls, there are stories that begin to echo, not from books, but from beneath the earth. Beneath your feet, hidden under layers of stone and time, ancient walls still stand. Silent, forgotten, but not empty. Some of them were built with purpose, some with fear, and some with memory. Tonight, I want to take you into one of those memories. A place that existed so long ago, its very name faded in dust, carried only in legend. A place of sunlit islands, of painted walls, and of a creature that never blinked. A place called Knossos. And at its center, the labyrinth. You've heard the myth before, maybe in school, maybe as a bedtime story. A monstrous half-man, half-bull creature. A twisted maze so vast, no one who entered ever returned. And a hero, Theseus, who braved the darkness, slayed the beast, and escaped by a thread. But what if I told you, it wasn't just a story? What if behind the myth, behind the legend of the Minotaur, there was a truth too uncomfortable to accept? What if the creature wasn't the monster? What if it was the place itself? You see, myths don't come from nowhere. They're shadows, stretched, twisted, and reshaped over generations. But every shadow needs something real to cast it. And in the heart of the Mediterranean, on the sun-drenched island of Crete, archaeologists uncovered something strange. Not a monster. Not bones. But stone. Endless stone. Corridors with no clear path. Rooms with no windows. Walls so winding, so confusing, it was said even daylight got lost inside. They called it the Palace of Knossos. But the locals had another name. They called it the Labyrinth. It wasn't built by gods. It wasn't carved by legend. It was real. And it was older than Athens. Older than Rome. So old, it seemed out of place, a memory from a world that vanished without leaving behind its voice. But stone can whisper. And that's what we'll listen to tonight. Because the further you step into this place, this palace, this maze, the more it feels like something still lives there. Not in flesh, not in shadow, but in presence. A sense that something was sealed away long ago. Not for its safety, but for ours. So rest now. Let the hum of history fill the quiet. And let's follow the thread, not of a hero, but of a question. What was the labyrinth? And why does its memory still breathe, when even its builders are gone? The story of the labyrinth begins long before the walls were built. Long before any myths spoke of beasts or heroes. To truly understand it, we need to go back, not hundreds, but thousands of years. To a time when the world was young and the sea was the only road. We're stepping into the Bronze Age. This was an era when writing was just beginning to shape thoughts into symbols. When cities were rare, and most people lived close to the soil, harvesting, fishing, surviving. But in the middle of the Mediterranean, something different was happening. On the island of Crete, a civilization was blooming. We call it the Minoan civilization, named after King Minos, the legendary ruler tied to the labyrinth story. But the people who lived here left us no clear name for themselves. No known language, no epic scrolls. Just the silence of their stone, and the echoes of their art. Still, those echoes are powerful. Because the Minoans were unlike anyone else at the time. While the rest of Europe was still scattered in primitive settlements, Crete was building cities. Multi-storied buildings. Roads. Warehouses. complex plumbing systems. And then, there was Knossos. It wasn't just a palace. It was a beating heart of trade, culture, belief. The center of a vast maritime network that stretched from Egypt to Cyprus, from Anatolia to Greece. A place where spices, metals, and stories flowed in like waves. But what makes it all so strange is how little we truly know. Despite all their art and innovation, the Minoans remain a mystery. We have their frescoes, but we don't understand their language. We see their gods, but we don't know their prayers. We found their cities, but we don't know how they ruled. It's as if this civilization rose out of the sea, flourished, and then dissolved into mist. But let's slow down for a moment. Imagine the island as it was 4,000 years ago. Lush green hills rolling toward the coast. Goats and olive trees dotting the terraces. Sailboats dancing on the water, sails curved like crescent moons. Now listen. The air carries music, flutes, drums, the distant rhythm of feet on stone. People are gathering in a courtyard. They wear robes, jewelry made of seashells and gold. Their skin is sun-darkened, their hair braided, eyes lined with color. They are preparing for a ritual. At the center, a large platform. A young boy and girl step forward, confident, practiced. Before them, a bull snorts, its muscles tense, eyes gleaming. This is bull leaping, a sacred dance. Not a fight. A performance. A challenge. A symbol. And it's everywhere in their art. In paintings, seals, pottery. But why? Why the bull? The answer may lie deeper than culture. It may be spiritual. The bull was a symbol of strength, of fertility, of power. And to tame it, or leap over it, was to show mastery over chaos. Now think about that. And remember the creature from the myth. The Minotaur, half man, half bull. Born from unnatural union. Trapped in a maze beneath a palace. The embodiment of something dangerous, something hidden. Was the myth born from these rituals? Did outsiders see the bull dances and imagine darker meanings? Or was something more, real, being remembered in secret? Here's another thought. The Minoans didn't just trade goods. They traded ideas. With Egypt. With Mesopotamia. They were at the crossroads of myth, a bridge between worlds. And in those worlds, labyrinths already existed. The Egyptians had underground temples and symbolic mazes. The Mesopotamians believed in gates between realms, guarded by monsters. It's possible that Crete became a canvas, where these mythologies blended and grew. A hybrid culture. A place where a palace could become a ritual space. And a ritual space could become a legend. And yet, even with all this, there's one more piece to the puzzle. And it lies not in art, but in the earth. Because beneath the surface of Knossos, under the tiles, the columns, the frescoes, archaeologists have found catacombs, winding tunnels, strange rooms, chambers with animal bones, burnt offerings, human teeth. Not many, but enough. Enough to suggest that sacrifice was more than metaphor, that fear may have had a real shape. So when we ask where the myth of the labyrinth came from, maybe we need to stop thinking of it as one myth. Maybe it's many truths, layered like the stone of the palace itself. The bull leaps, the catacombs, the rituals, the trade, the silence. Together, they form something larger. Not a corridor, not a maze, but a mind, a cultural memory, too powerful to die. So it hid itself in a story we're still trying to map. And as we step closer to the heart of that story, we arrive at a place that still stands today, crumbled, yes, but not erased. A palace, a labyrinth, a riddle in stone. The ruins of Knossos were first uncovered in the early 20th century. The man who led the excavation was an English archaeologist named Sir Arthur Evans. Driven by a fascination for mythology and the whispers of a forgotten civilization, Evans arrived on Crete in 1900. What he found was staggering. At first glance, the ruins seemed chaotic. Piles of broken stone, collapsed walls, columns shattered like bones. But as Evans dug deeper, a shape began to emerge. A structure unlike anything seen before. It wasn't a simple palace. It was a city inside a building. Corridors that twisted without pattern. Staircases that led both up and down, some to nowhere. Rooms that seemed designed to confuse. To Evans, it felt familiar. He thought of the ancient Greek stories. The ones that spoke of a labyrinth beneath a palace. A place where a creature had once lived, a creature that was part man, part beast. Evans was convinced. He believed he had found the real labyrinth. And in a way, he had. Knossos wasn't just large, it was vast. Over 1,300 rooms. Interconnected halls. Multiple floors. And most importantly, no clear central throne room. This wasn't a place built to display power. It was built to contain something. Or, to disorient. He named the civilization Minoan, after King Minos, the legendary ruler of the labyrinth. And from that moment on, the line between archaeology and mythology began to blur. But let's step back from the legend and look closer at what Evans found. Inside the ruins were frescoes, stunning wall paintings still rich with color. They showed dolphins dancing through waves, priestesses in flowing gowns, bull leapers mid-flight, suspended in the air like spirits. There was no art of war, no scenes of conquest, only ritual, nature, celebration. This was not a culture obsessed with death and battle, like later Greece or Rome. This was a society seemingly devoted to life. But that makes the labyrinth even stranger. Because hidden among the beauty were darker finds. Storerooms filled with hundreds of massive jars, some large enough to hold a person. Basements with narrow passages and low ceilings. Strange, locked rooms with no windows. And then, the horns. Carved stone horns, everywhere. On roofs. On altars. On walls. Some scholars call them horns of consecration. Evans believed they symbolized the sacred bull, a recurring theme. Others believe they were warnings. Here's where it gets even more mysterious. Beneath the main complex were underground chambers, natural caves, but modified. Evans and later archaeologists found signs of fire, bones, both animal and possibly human. Evidence suggests these caves may have been used in ritual, perhaps even for sacrifices. It's hard to say what kind, the evidence is fragmentary. But the feeling is unmistakable. You don't walk into those spaces and feel peace. You feel memory. And in that memory, the myth stirs again. A maze. A monster. A people afraid to speak the truth. So they turned it into legend. But here's what makes it even more powerful. The Labyrinth of Crete was never just about walls. It was a mental puzzle, a spiritual journey, a political trap, a sacred space designed to confuse, awaken, maybe even terrify. No one knows exactly why it was built this way. But that's the point. You don't build a place like this to make life easy. You build it to transform the one who enters. And maybe that's the real heart of the myth. The Minotaur wasn't the monster. The labyrinth was. A space that changed people. That tested them. That left them different. Evans wanted to find a monster, a king, a hero. But what he found instead was a memory made of stone. A place still alive in silence. The Minotaur. Even the name evokes something primal. Half man, half bull, a creature that doesn't belong in either world. It's easy to treat it as fantasy. A monster invented to scare, to symbolize chaos. But myths don't last thousands of years unless they carry something deeper. So where did this beast come from? Let's begin with the earliest versions of the myth. According to the Greek story, the Minotaur was born from a curse. King Minos asked the god Poseidon for a sign of divine favor, a perfect white bull. He was meant to sacrifice it in gratitude. But when Minos saw the beauty of the animal, he kept it. And the gods punished him. Poseidon made Minos's wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the bull. She gave birth to the Minotaur, a creature of shame and horror. Minos, horrified, ordered a labyrinth built to imprison the beast. That's the myth. But behind it lies a cultural echo. Let's go back to the Minoans. They worshipped bulls. Not in fear, but in reverence. Bulls were sacred, tied to strength, fertility, the rhythm of the earth. And yet, they also demanded respect. They were unpredictable, dangerous. Think about the bull leaping ritual again. Was it just sport? Or a symbolic act, a way to confront chaos face to face? Some scholars believe the Minotaur is a symbol of the bull itself, viewed through Greek eyes. The Greeks saw the Minoan bull worship, and didn't understand it. They imagined something dark, unnatural. They reinterpreted Minoan rituals as perverse, monstrous. And in that misunderstanding, the Minotaur was born. But there's more. The labyrinth wasn't just a physical place. It may have been a spiritual trial. To enter was to face your fear, your shame, your secrets. And the Minotaur? It may have represented the thing hidden inside the self. The part of us that is wild. That wants. That disobeys. That cannot be tamed by walls or kings. In psychological terms, the Minotaur is the shadow, the unconscious self. And the labyrinth is the mind. The story becomes a journey inward. Think of Theseus, the Greek hero who enters the maze. He carries a sword, yes. But more importantly, he carries a thread, a lifeline. With it, he doesn't just escape. He maps the unknown. He brings order to chaos. This is not just a tale of killing a monster. It's a metaphor for confronting the hidden self and surviving it. But perhaps the most haunting part of the myth is this. The Minotaur was not a stranger. He was the child of the queen. He was raised beneath the palace. He was family. Minos didn't kill him. He locked him away. And every few years, he fed him with children from Athens. Was it punishment or guilt? A sacrifice meant to keep the secret hidden? In some versions of the myth, the Minotaur is said to weep in his maze. Alone. Forgotten. Cursed by a birth he never chose. That's not the story of a villain. It's the story of a prisoner. And maybe that's the point. The real monster wasn't the Minotaur. It was the world that created him. The walls that were built around him. The silence that grew louder with every year. So when we look at Knossos, and imagine that creature in its depths, we should ask ourselves, what do we fear so much, that we choose to bury it instead of face it? Because every culture has its labyrinth. By the time the Greeks inherited the myths of the Minoans, centuries had passed. Knossos had fallen. The palaces were ruins. And the memory of what once was, had begun to fade. But myths don't die. They change. The story of the Minotaur didn't vanish with the Minoans. It was absorbed, reshaped, rewritten by the Greeks, to suit their worldview. Let's look at the Greek version. They made Theseus the hero, a prince of Athens. Strong, brave, clever. He volunteers to enter the labyrinth, to kill the beast and free his people. It's the perfect Greek tale. A nobleman confronting chaos. A monster representing savagery. And a woman, Ariadne, who helps him escape, only to be abandoned later. It's dramatic. It's moral. But it's also a very Greek. Because here's what the Greeks valued. Order. Logic. Control. Heroism. They saw the earlier myths of other cultures, the strange gods, the sacred bulls, the feminine deities, and they rewrote them. Not out of malice, but to fit their own mirror. To them, the Minotaur wasn't sacred. It was shameful. The labyrinth wasn't a temple. It was a prison. And Theseus wasn't a seeker of truth. He was a slayer of monsters. In doing so, the Greeks flattened the complexity of older stories. They turned the ritual into danger. They made the sacred into the savage. This rewriting wasn't unique. They did it with the Titans, once gods of nature and chaos, reduced to villains defeated by Zeus. They did it with Prometheus, a symbol of ancient knowledge, punished for helping humanity. They even rewrote the story of the Great Mother, once a central figure in Mediterranean spirituality, into minor characters. The Greeks weren't destroying myths. They were organizing them, ranking them, fitting them into neat boxes. And in that process, they lost something. Because sometimes, the power of a myth isn't in what it says, but in what it suggests. The Minoan world was full of symbols. Bulls, spirals, double axes. We don't fully understand them. But we know they were not designed to be conquered. They were meant to be experienced. So when the Greeks gave us Theseus, the killer of the Minotaur, they gave us clarity. But they took away the mystery. And that's a loss. Because maybe the labyrinth was never meant to be solved. Maybe it was meant to be lived in. To be wondered. To be questioned. The Greek version is heroic. But the Minoan version, the one we glimpse through ruins and fragments, is more human. It doesn't offer easy answers. It whispers. It hints. It waits. And that's what makes it powerful. Because in our rush to explain everything, we sometimes forget that some stories are meant to remain strange. Not every monster needs a sword. Not every mystery needs a hero. Sometimes, it's enough to just listen. To let the silence of the stones speak. To let the echo of the past ripple through us. And in that silence, we might find something truer than legend, something older than words, something that still breathes beneath the ruins of Knossos. We often think of the labyrinth as a trap, a prison for the beast, a place meant to confuse, disorient, isolate. But what if that's not what it was at all? What if the labyrinth wasn't built to hide a monster, but to transform a person? Across ancient cultures, we find sacred paths, not roads to places, but roads inward. They twist, they double back, they spiral, not because the builders were lost, but because the journey itself was the point. Think of the labyrinth not as a maze to escape, but as a ritual, a place you enter one way and leave changed. Some scholars believe that the labyrinth in Crete was part of a rite of passage, a symbolic death and rebirth. Perhaps it was a place where the young came to prove themselves, not by killing, but by confronting the unknown. In this light, the Minotaur becomes something else entirely. Not a monster, but an archetype. The challenge you must face. The fear that waits in the center of you. To walk the labyrinth is to leave behind the world. To step into confusion, darkness, echoes, and somewhere deep inside, yourself. Then, to return, older, wiser, reborn. This idea isn't unique to Crete. In Native American cultures, the spiral or maze represents the journey of life, the inward and outward movement of growth. In medieval cathedrals, labyrinths were etched into the floor, walked by monks as a form of spiritual pilgrimage. Even today, walking a labyrinth in silence is seen as a way to calm the mind and open the soul. Could the Minoans have used the labyrinth in the same way? There's no written proof. But look at the ruins of Knossos, the corridors, the stairways, the twisting architecture. It mimics a maze. It confuses. It plays with space and shadow. And remember, the Minoans weren't warriors. They were artists, traders, priests. Their power came not from conquest, but from ceremony. A rite of passage fits their world. Maybe a boy, on the edge of manhood, was led into the winding halls, alone, carrying nothing, hearing only the beat of his own heart, facing visions, or fears, in the dark. Maybe the Minotaur wasn't real. Maybe he was a mask, worn by a priest, or imagined by the initiate. The point wasn't to slay. The point was to endure, to walk through fear, and emerge on the other side. And in that moment, the child became something new. Not a prince, not a killer, but a person who had seen the inside of the world, and returned. This view changes everything. It means the labyrinth was never a curse. It was a gift, a sacred place, a mirror, a passage. Even Theseus changes in this light. He becomes not a conqueror, but a candidate. He enters the maze. He faces the unknown. And with the help of Ariadne's thread, a symbol of memory, of connection, he returns. Maybe that's the real story. Not of heroism, but of becoming. Because every one of us has a labyrinth. Every one of us faces a moment when the world stops making sense. When the walls close in. When the echoes confuse. And every one of us must walk, alone, into the dark, toward the center, toward the Minotaur, whatever it is. And hope that, like Theseus, We carry a thread strong enough to find our way home. The ruins of Knossos sit beneath the Cretan sun like a riddle. Red columns. Faded frescoes. A palace. Or was it? In 1900, a British archaeologist named Arthur Evans began digging here. What he found changed history. Beneath layers of earth and olive groves, he uncovered vast stone foundations, corridors, courtyards, staircases, storage rooms, ceremonial halls. A city beneath the soil. He called it a palace. But it was more than that. Some rooms had no windows. Some hallways seemed to go nowhere. The layout was confusing, intentionally so. Evans believed he had found the labyrinth. Not the one of myth, but its origin. He reconstructed parts of the site, red pillars, white walls, mythic murals. He named it the Palace of Minos, after the legendary king. But Evans did more than excavate. He interpreted. And interpretation is tricky. He saw a throne room and called it royal. He found a symbol of a double axe and called it ceremonial. He found images of bulls and thought of the Minotaur. Was he right? Maybe. Maybe not. Some modern scholars say Evans projected the myth onto the ruins. That he romanticized. That he saw a labyrinth because he wanted to see it. Others argue the opposite. That the myths were based on something real. That the ruins whispered ancient truths, if only we'd listen. So what do we know? Knossos was massive, larger than anything else on Crete. It had plumbing, ventilation, multi-story buildings. It flourished around 2000 to 1400 BCE. The frescoes show acrobats leaping over bulls, women in layered skirts, dancers with bare chests and painted eyes. It was vibrant, alive, full of ceremony. But it's the architecture that raises eyebrows. There are corridors that twist and spiral. Rooms with hidden doors. Spaces that feel theatrical. Not military. Not defensive. More like sacred space. And then, there's the storage rooms. Hundreds of pithoi, giant jars, lined up in long rows. Were they storing grain, oil, offerings, or something else? Some researchers believe Knossos was more of a temple complex than a palace. That the priests held more power than kings. That ritual, not rule, was the center of life. The walls suggest this. So do the artifacts. But the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. One chamber has no light at all. It descends into the earth, step by step, until you're surrounded by stone and silence. Some believe it was used for initiations. Others say it was where the dead were honored. Or perhaps, where gods were born. And always, the bull. The symbol appears again and again. Horns of consecration. Murals of bull leaping. The double axe, or labyrinth, linked to both power and ritual. In Minoan culture, the bull was sacred. It wasn't hunted. It wasn't feared. It was worshipped. Which makes the Greek myth of Theseus, a bull killer, feel like a reversal. A retelling by a later culture that no longer understood. Even the word labyrinth may come from labyrinth, the double axe. Not a maze, but a house of ritual. A temple. A memory. And so Knossos stands, half palace, half myth. Its stones are real. Its stories are echoes. And as we walk through the site today, under the sun, we step between two worlds. The archaeological and the legendary. The factual and the forgotten, the seen, and the felt. Because Knossos is more than ruins. It's a question, and the answer may not be written in any book, but waiting, still, in the dust. For centuries, the Minoans ruled the Aegean. Their ships sailed to Egypt, to Mesopotamia, across the Mediterranean. Their art flourished. Their cities thrived. But around 1450 BCE, something happened. Suddenly, silence. Palaces burned. Frescoes blackened. The vibrant culture vanished. What caused the fall of the Minoans? Some say volcanoes. North of Crete, on the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, a great volcano erupted. Not a small eruption. A cataclysm. It may have been the largest volcanic event in human memory. Ash filled the skies. Tsunamis swept across the Aegean. Crops failed. Trade collapsed. Could this have destroyed the Minoans? It's possible. The eruption of Thera is dated around 1600 BCE, a century before the fall of Knossos. But its effects may have been long-lasting. Waves battering the coastlines. Ash poisoning the soil. Famine. Instability. Some scholars believe the disaster weakened the Minoans, and then the Mycenaeans came. The Mycenaeans, warriors from the mainland. They had fortresses, weapons, and ambition. To them, Crete was a jewel, a prize. They invaded, took control, made Knossos their seat of power. And just like that, the Minoan world ended. Or did it? Because even after the fall, traces of Minoan life persisted. Their art influenced Mycenaean palaces. Their symbols appeared in new temples. Their stories survived in myth. Theseus, the Minotaur, Ariadne, the Labyrinth. Perhaps what the Greeks remembered wasn't just a story, but the ghost of a real world they only partly understood. Some say the fall was divine punishment. Others believe in political collapse, climate change, or internal revolt. But the truth is, we don't know for sure. And maybe that's what makes it powerful. The idea that even the greatest civilizations can vanish. Not because of weakness, but because of fate. That under the waves, or beneath the earth, entire histories can be buried. And that what we call a myth might just be a memory wearing a mask. Today, when we stand at Knossos or gaze into the crater of Santorini, we don't just see ruins. We see a question. How does a people so advanced, so artistic, so connected, just disappear? It reminds us how fragile civilization can be, how quickly the world can change, how stories survive longer than cities, and how the echoes of a vanished world can still whisper, if we're quiet enough to listen.